What do you make of Biden's foreign policy in these first few months? What are the big things that stand out?
It's been a real mixed bag. I mean, on the one hand, it's good that he is maintaining the deal that, well, I mean, he delayed it, but maintaining Trump's deal to get out of Afghanistan, so that's really good. At the same time, I mean, I think the thing with every good thing that Biden's done on foreign policy or domestic is whenever it happens, there's like a caveat. When you read a little bit past the details, or you keep paying attention to the issue beyond that, you see that, oh, okay, this hasn't actually gone quite as far as I hoped, or he hasn't really even done the thing that he said he was going to do. On Afghanistan, for instance, there was actually a report in New York Magazine about a month ago or so about this big hiring spree for private military contractors for Afghanistan. And so it certainly seems like, sure, the troops are going to leave, but they may just be being replaced by private mercenaries. And the administration has said, privately, kind of off the record, or anonymously to papers, that, well, we're going to keep drone striking and doing special forces strikes in Afghanistan. So, I mean, that's a withdrawal in kind of the way that I guess most Americans think of it, but it's not really a proper withdrawal, because if troops are still in there, I mean, if you're still bombing a country, if China was sending drones into the United States and bombing it, you wouldn't be like, well, this isn't war. This is this is just good, clean fun. No, I mean, obviously those are acts of war. So okay, but that's a good thing. I mean, at the same time, I mean, all of this has to be understood in the context of this pivot to a new Cold War with China. So, one of the things that was really good, and actually earned some rare praise for me, for Biden, was I thought some of his recent actions around Russia were actually quite good, because contrary to the common perception, Trump may have been very obsequious and flattering to Putin in person in his public rhetoric, but in what he actually did as president, he was pretty belligerent, alarmingly belligerent. And Biden's kind of the opposite, where he's been kind of talking tough, and he's done some things, sanctions and the like, to I guess show that he's not going to be like Trump, but he seems to be moving in a direction of trying to tamp down tensions with Russia. We saw that at the summit the other week. The press was going all in and trying to extract some sort of hawkish escalatory talking point from him, and he was basically saying, no, it's fine. They're a competitor, they're an adversary, but we can work together, so on and so forth. So I thought that was good. On the other hand, much like the Afghanistan thing, I mean, this also has to be understood as this part of this pivot towards China, because Biden wants conflict with China, or at least competition. He wants a saber rattle against it. It makes no sense to be doing that, but then also antagonizing Russia, because Russia's a nuclear power. It has been kind of moving closer to China. So if you want to isolate China, you wouldn't want to antagonize Russia as well. You would want to, at the very least, if not have them on your side, at least have them, not necessarily on China's side if and when things get heated. I mean, on other matters, as you say, there hasn't been a massive break from Trumpism that people were expecting. I mean, it's the same old foreign policy as always. The U.S. supports democracy movements and movements and efforts to more democracy in countries where that serves its interest. Where it serves its interest to support authoritarians, dictators, despots, it's doing that as well. I mean, we saw that with Saudi Arabia. Biden made a big show on the campaign trail that he was going to, he was really going to hold Saudi Arabia to account for the Khashoggi killing. And what did he actually do? He punished some of the senior leadership, but he kept the crown prince basically unpunished, because at the end of the day, he wants to work with them to fight terrorism. And that's maybe the other thing. I could go on and on and on, but I'll maybe leave it here. I think the other part of it is that the war on terror really shows no signs of really de-escalating. It's still going on, and I mean, frighteningly, what Biden's actually doing is he's bringing the war on terror home. Supposedly against white supremacists and neo-Nazis. I mean, I'm sure those people will be prosecuted as well. But I mean, we have already concrete cases that we've seen where leftists, anarchists, and the like have been kind of targeted, if not for prosecution, then for sort of surveillance in the wake of the January 6th incident. So that's really scary.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Ken Klippenstein from The Intercept obtained some documents from the military indicating that, like, through their training materials, they group in socialism and Nazism as, extremist ideologies. So it kind of gives you a sense of, where both the military and the federal government is on the left in this country. But I wanted to also just kind of ask you a follow-up on something you said, because I'm curious to learn the details about it. So you mentioned that Trump was actually far more belligerent toward Russia, and you're happy to see that Biden has kind of reversed that. I know that, while his rhetoric seemed pretty friendly toward Russia, Trump was willing to implement sanctions and all of that other stuff. What other belligerent behavior are you referring to?
Well, he was trying to block the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that Russia's trying to build to basically take natural gas, to export its natural gas directly to Europe. And that's a big, really, really important, not just economic, but geostrategic policy for Putin, because basically what that would do is it would leapfrog or avoid going through Ukraine. I think right now it's a large percentage of Russia's natural gas has to go through Ukraine to get to Central Europe and further west. And so this kind of eliminates the need to do that. And it's a big thing. I mean, in terms of geostrategy, NATO itself has kind of warned its members of this effort. They've said, what Russia is trying to do is it's trying to kind of cleave apart NATO and cleave apart Europe by making Western European countries like France and Germany and some of those Central European states more reliant on its gas. So, we have to oppose this pipeline for that reason. Trump was really against it. I think more for his own economic vision of turbocharging American fossil fuel production. But nonetheless, he was opposed to it, and Biden has decided not to sanction the pipeline. So it's going to go ahead. I mean, it still has a way to go before it gets built, but that's a huge win for Putin. Another thing is that Trump kind of talked about trying to, negotiate certain deals with Putin, but I mean, in reality, he withdrew from a whole heap of arms control treaties. And Biden now, I mean, nothing concrete, but they did agree at that summit to restart nuclear talks, which is critical. I mean, nuclear war, the shadow or the prospect of nuclear war has never gone away just because the Cold War is over. In many ways, it's more alarming now because with the end of the Cold War, you don't have the same infrastructure of communication and diplomacy that you used to have during the Cold War, when everyone was terrified that it was going to erupt at any moment into all-out nuclear holocaust. That doesn't really so much exist anymore, and so it could be very easy for miscommunication or a sort of misreading of signs, or even just a malfunction of systems to erupt into full-scale war. That's nearly happened, at least half a dozen times already in our history. So getting that return to some sort of, maybe not friendly diplomatic relations with Russia, but at the very least to a point where those countries can, at minimum, avoid a full-scale nuclear confrontation, and I would say more hopefully actually cut their nuclear stockpiles with the a long-term goal of actually eventually getting rid of nuclear weapons entirely. That's a really good thing. Again, it has to be seen whether that's going to happen, but there's some encouraging signs, and maybe this pivot to China is going to perhaps in some ways help that effort. Unfortunately, though, then you've got the pivot to confrontation with China to worry about. So, it's it never ends.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, even Trump's support for the, Montenegro's admittance into NATO was. I mean, it's hard for us in the U.S. to see it this way, but it's akin to like if Russia or China signed a military alliance with Nicaragua or something. Like there would be an absolute meltdown here. Like that is like a direct kind of affront to Russia's interests.
And don't forget, Trump sent weapons to Ukraine for the conflict there, which Obama refused to do quite sensibly because he understood that was a major provocation and escalation. And Trump was sort of ridiculed for a long time because they had the GOP had taken that out of their platform, sending weapons, and it was sort of, oh look, Trump's kowtowing to Putin, yada yada yada. But he ended up doing it, and Biden. There was a report in the Washington Post that Biden actually pulled back. He was going to send aid, and he decided not to in the end because Putin had also withdrawn some troops from the Ukraine border. That's really important, and that's a big. It seems to be a bit of a change from the Trump administration. But it shows you, this narrative about how Trump was so friendly to Russia. This administration was
it was very weird. It was a very weird phenomenon of the last. It's funny because like you said, it's just completely opposite with Biden, in which he's like, I'm gonna give that Putin a piece of my mind. I'm just gonna, like whatever, and everyone's like, yeah, look at him. I want to just to wrap it up because we're running out of time. I want to just very quickly just ask what Biden's been up to on immigration. Immigration was just so central to I think people's revulsion to Trump. I mean, and also to his support, to be fair. But like I think that the images of kids in cages and all that stuff, and Trump, famously went down the escalator and said the Mexicans were rapists and all that stuff. What has Biden been up to on immigration?
Yeah, what's been interesting to me about this whole thing is that Trump's immigration policies were kind of one of the chief reasons that people had this really kind of apocalyptic reaction to him, and they were kind of cited. Probably not. I mean, I would say climate change was the number one reason to if you're going to vote against Trump. But people often cite his immigration policy that it was fascistic and everything, which I don't disagree with. But in the end, Biden's immigration policy it's definitely better from a humanistic standpoint than what Trump is doing. But it's not that much different. I mean, granted they are dealing with a crisis that Trump really escalated and made worse, sure. But I mean, for example, the public health order that Trump put on in 2020 when coronavirus came out, that was at the time called basically the height of racism, because what Trump was saying was, we're going to use the coronavirus, we're going to use the pandemic to basically close the southern border entirely. You can't even go to, try and go for asylum. We're just going to kick you out if you come through the border, and we're going to send you back to Mexico. And that was, people said, this is fascism and racism in action. This is no public health justification, yada, 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 all of which I agree. And I think is true. But Biden's kept that in because it's very useful for them. They don't want to be seen as letting through thousands and thousands of migrants, because I think they know they're going to get attacked by the right. And so that public health order has been used for, over the course of the last, what are we up to now, during the course of the last 5 months, to just kick people out and basically stop people even from applying for asylum. There was a lot of praise given to Trump. Biden getting rid of the Freudian slip, getting rid of the remain in Mexico policy. Right. So when you apply for asylum, rather than doing it in the United States, because if you're applying for asylum from somewhere because you're worried that you're going to be murdered, you don't want to stay in the place that your life is under threat.
Kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And so he kind of repealed it, but I mean, it's not really repealed. I mean, they've stopped doing it, but basically what's happened with the public health order is you effectively, unless you're one of the lucky few, they sort of have a little discretionary policy, and they bring in, I think, a few hundred people here and there. But ultimately, I mean, that basically just means you whether you're applying for asylum or whatever, you are just stuck in Mexico. And people have been, all the stuff that we always hear about, the horror that's happening in Central America, the kidnappings, murder, rape, all that stuff, burglaries. That's all happening to these people who are forced to stay in Mexico right now without any really other recourse. On the other hand, I mean, some of the stuff that's been repealed, the public charge rule, obviously, that's a big one that basically said, it made it very hard for you to be able to get, residency and citizenship if you had ever used basically relied on government welfare, relied on government benefits at any point. So Biden got rid of that. And obviously, things like the Muslim ban and all that. I mean, low-hanging fruit, obviously, it's just a no-brainer that you get rid of that. But, I mean, it's a good thing, I guess. I mean, those big flagship items that got a lot of press, yeah, that's real fine. But then you've still got all these, maybe a little more obscure things that Trump was doing that Biden hasn't completely gotten rid of. Supposedly, they're going to do it over time. It's just in this period that they're sort of doing that. But, I mean, if you condemn Trump for doing it, then you can't just say, well, it's fine if Biden does it. And then secondly, I mean, it remains to be seen whether that is temporary. That's what you always hear with any sort of program like this that's incredibly controversial and brutal towards people, is that, this is just temporary. It's only going to be here for a bit. And then what ends up happening is it slowly gets kind of institutionalized. So, yeah, it remains to be seen what happens with that.
Yeah.
All right. Branko, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Everyone, go check out his book. You will not regret it. It's titled Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden. It'll help you understand a lot of what's going on right now. Branko, thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.